Welcome to Archive West Texas. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson. Also in our studio today, Thomas Dye, the man who makes this show happen. We're pleased to continue our conversation with Curtis Griffith today. Last week we talked about his family and their pioneering efforts in Cochran County and his education. Today we'll focus more on his banking interests and how he grew Citibank into the institution it is today as South Plains Financial. Curtis, one of your mentors you mentioned earlier was Gene Benham, and Citibank, West Texas people in general have always had a sense of independence. Mr. Benham had a particular role in establishing the Texas Independent Bankers Association. Talk us through that a little bit.
In the mid-1970s, the rules changed in Texas, and back up a little here too. People probably today have not a lot of memories of the fact that for most of our history as a state, Texas was what's known as a unit banking state, which means you had one bank, which meant one building. And that's hard to even think about today, but that's the way it was. You had a bank charter and you had a building, and that could be the First State Bank of Morton or it could be the First National Bank of Dallas. There were no branches. Didn't have such things. That wasn't allowed. It was in other states, but not Texas. We also didn't allow any out-of-state banks to come in. Bank holding companies, which essentially are corporations that own banks, that's what South Plains Financial is. It is a bank holding company. We happen to be publicly traded these days since 2019, but that's what it is. Originally, those could only hold a single bank, but then some of the big banks got the laws changed and they could acquire other banks. So they had multi-bank holding companies. And banking, historically, we've had what are known as upstream correspondent banks. That's bigger banks that us smaller guys can do some business with. They would acquire our loans sometimes. If we needed to make a loan to somebody that was bigger than our legal lending limit, they might buy our overlines. They would handle our cash letters, which is still a system that today, even though it's changed radically from what it was back in those days with nothing but paper checks, or allow ways to move payments through the system because the smaller banks just weren't big enough to go out and deal directly with the Federal Reserve and clear items and all that. So the big banks started buying up some other banks, and the smaller banks that were not being purchased were very fearful of, in effect, doing business with people that are now competing with them. That led Mr. Benham and some other folks within a similar situation to start the Independent Bankers Association of Texas. Mr. Benham served as the third president of that. They also started, he and 8 other gentlemen, that started what at that time was known as Texas Independent Bank. Today it simply goes by initials TIB. It was the first bankers bank in the nation. That was created during the Carter administration and actually required federal legislation to do it because it was a bank chartered that did no business with anybody other than banks. And so it became the correspondent upstream bank for a lot of banks in Texas and still does a fine job of that today. Mr. Benham just enjoyed, I think, being in that realm. It took him outside the small confines of Morton and allowed him to hobnob, I guess, with folks in the state and the national independent bank organizations. And I got to kind of follow along in his shadow and get acquainted with those people too. And those relationships have been very valuable to us over the years.
It's great background information. So we're moving in your story into the late 70s, early 80s. You're still farming. You're a leader at First State Bank of Morton, and you guys begin to try to grow this business. Talk us through that growth a little bit, but also our listeners are probably familiar with the Great Recession of 08, 09. Everybody's heard about the high-tech crash of the stock market in the 2000s, and we're even dealing with tariff wars and other kind of economic crises today. But talk about the state of banking in Texas in 1985, 86.
Well, the lead-up is that in the late 1970s, and I won't get into all the history of this. Of course, it's out there for anybody that would like to read it, and it is pretty fascinating, especially looking at some of the economic upheavals we're seeing today, that for various reasons, the Arab oil embargo happened, which just spiked up oil prices enormously in the late 80s. that began to drive inflation. And in the very late 70s, last part of President Carter's term and the first couple of years of President Reagan's term, we had double-digit inflation for about 4 years. That was certainly unsustainable. It was very painful.
Yeah, a prime interest rate of 22% at one point.
That's what happened. Now, let's be clear. That wasn't the situation right then. But a gentleman named Paul Volcker was head of the Federal Reserve, and he explained to President Reagan that he could stop inflation. And President Reagan decided he'd let him do it. And Mr. Volcker, very tall man with, as Mr. Benham used to call him, the big man with the big cigar. And he said, yep, I can shut it down, and I'll do it with interest rates. And they drove the prime rate all the way up to about 21.5%, I believe, or that range. And inflation did cease pretty much, or it dropped way back. It was low single digits. But it crippled a lot of the American economy to do that. Many businesses that were debtors, including farmers, who are functionally always debtors, struggled with rates that high. We were fortunate at First State Bank that while we had mostly farm loans, a big part of them were operating loans, not larger land loans. So the operating loans, they struggled, but they managed to make some good crops during some of those years. Production was pretty good. And commodity prices began to move up, probably as a result of the inflation as well, that allowed them to still survive. So we were still in pretty fair shape, but a lot of banks began to struggle. That started with the savings and loan industry. They had built an entire business model on the fact that interest rates at that time, a lot of people don't remember this, the interest rates that financial institutions could pay were controlled by something called Reg Q. That was eventually began to be taken off and removed in the mid to late 80s. And as those rates moved on up rather drastically, the savings and loan model just cratered. They'd also made the foolish mistake of letting some people that were large borrowers from those savings and loans also own them. And that was pretty much putting the fox in charge of the hen house, and it wiped out what had been a good sustaining industry. We used to do a lot of our own business with some savings and loans and buy CDs there and such too, but that went away in the early 80s. But the contagion spread, and essentially every large bank in Texas, I believe I'm right in saying this, other than Frost Bank in San Antonio, the larger banks at the time all failed.
InterFirst, Mercantile, Republic,
all those, Texas Commerce had operations here in Lubbock. And they were eventually acquired by out-of-state banks, which couldn't have happened earlier. But again, the law was changed. I believe that was in 1995, which allowed out-of-state banks to acquire in-state banks across state lines, which Texas had always prohibited. But that then began to allow full branching as well, and it did transform the industry.
All right, it's time for us to take another quick break. Crisis sometimes presents opportunity. When we come back, we'll just talk more about how you grew First State Bank of Morton into Citibank and beyond. I want to remind everybody that if you have a future guest to recommend for Archive West Texas, please email us at info@classical1057.org. Thank you again for listening today. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're happy to have Curtis Griffith with us today. In our last segment, we talked a little bit about the Independent Bankers Association of Texas and also the crisis that appeared nationally, but particularly in Texas in the financial industry in the mid to late 80s. Curtis, we referenced the fact that sometimes crisis presents opportunity. Tell us how you and the team at First State Bank of Morton began to grow the business, specifically how you came to Lubbock and launched Citibank.
In the 80s, after I became chairman in 84, we began to see some bank failures in the area and knew that it was a growing problem. The FDIC started working on finding ways to sell those banks to other banks to get them into some stronger hands. We were solid enough that we got presented with some opportunities, and we looked at, I think, about 4 different banks that we were potentially interested in, but never did actually acquire one of them. We worked pretty hard to acquire what had been the first national bank in Levelland. And for people that don't know, the system kind of worked as a way that you would get to come in over a period of generally about at least a month, and sometimes a little longer than that, to really look inside the bank before they pulled the plug, in effect. Now, the employees of that bank knew what was going on, or most of them did, so they were certainly fearful for their jobs and everything else as people came in and started digging through all their files. But that was kind of the system that people used, and it gave us some opportunities to look at other banks, learn some lessons from some things not to do. But we didn't end up ever buying one from the FDIC. At the conclusion of the auction, I guess you'd call it, we'd submit sealed bids to FDIC and go down and meet in their offices in Dallas. For the First National Levelland, we were told that we were not the winning bid, and our main regulator from the state said you guys were probably a little small to buy it anyway, because it was functionally, even in its state, was about twice our size from Morton. So it would have been a big lift to do it anyway. So the fortunate thing was that Mike Liner, who was president of the bank at the time, he and I stopped in Love Field, made a phone call back to West Texas, and hired the number one lender and the head of the trust department from First National. And they absolutely picked us up at the airport, and we started figuring out how to use their talents and their connections to move business, which we did. And that was really the beginning of our trust department. We already had trust powers, fortunately, at the bank. And Ricky Neal was brought quite a bit of the business, gradually moved over. K.W. Hill, who just recently retired, began to work on the loan side and get a lot of our business in Hockley County. We went ahead to buy what was South Plains National Bank in 1991 in Levelland. Brought in some great folks there, and they had a very young cashier by the name of Corey Newsom that was working there. He started part-time tellering there at the bank when he was a 16-year-old high school student, and was still part of that organization.
That worked out all right.
It's worked out pretty good. I think we're going to keep him. He's been a great leader for us for all these years. In 1993, well, actually 1992. Late 1992, a fellow named Bill Lloyd owned what was then Citibank. It had been Security National Bank. It was actually the first bank in the region to fail in April of 1984. Bill bought it from the FDIC at auction. At that point, it was still a very crude process. You didn't really get a chance to look very much at anything. You pretty much just stuck a number and wrote down a number on a piece of paper, wrote down 3 names that you'd call the new company, and on a Friday night, FDIC showed up, closed the bank, ran all the employees out, and then took the bids. And Monday morning, it was yours. Good luck. So Bill paid, as he told us later, probably way too high a price for it, but nobody knew at the time what made real sense. But Bill had been successful with some other banks out in the country around this area, Dimmitt, Plains, Portales, and Muleshoe, kind of turned around institutions in those towns in his career. And he wrote 2 names down and said FDIC said they were too much like other banks in the market, but he said, a 3rd name, Citibank, because he'd owned banks in the country before but never had one in the city. So thus, we've been Citibank ever since. I've heard some disputes on that story, but I'll go with Bill's version of it. He straightened things up, worked on it, and then in late 1992 decided he'd be ready to sell that one. His wife was having a few health difficulties, and they were approaching retirement age anyway. It was going to sell to the folks over at Plains, then still Plains National, I think, at that point. I don't think they were Plains Capital yet. But the bond market took a real sharp dip, and Alan White said, well, of course, we got to adjust the purchase price here because your bond portfolio's not worth what it was when we negotiated the deal. And Bill, being a fairly crusty gentleman, said, no, we're not, and said, this is the price you said you'd pay for the bank, so that's what you'll pay. And Alan said, well, I can't pay that, so good luck. And we heard about that and stepped in then in early 93. I visited with Bill, and about 45 minutes after we heard about that and shook hands, in October of 93, we bought Citibank. So at that time, we had 3 charters, one in Morton, one in Levelland, and the new one there in in Lubbock, and were roughly 200 million in size with the three institutions. So we were definitely big time, we thought, by then. So
talk us through the growth trajectory from there to today, and that's a lot to cover, but give us the snapshot of that.
It was a pretty good time to come in, and to be clear, we were really buying the bank, which had quite a bit of ag lending in it, frankly. Some of the folks, Jimmy McKenzie's one that was there at the time, still with us today, heads up our ag lending department. So we've always known that was a key part of what we do and near and dear to our heart. But we didn't know how much other commercial lending we might really want to do. In fact, I was famously quoted in the Avalanche Journal as that we were getting this bank because we wanted to make farm loans all around the South Plains from this as a headquarters location, but we really weren't too interested in making loans inside the loop. Well, you can imagine how well that went over in the Lubbock group, and including your father stopped in not too long after that to kind of visit about whether that would make sense. Yeah, he explained what we might actually ought to do instead. So we began to work it out, and I got my foot out of my mouth, and under some good leadership, we began to expand and acquired some other banks about 5 years later up along Highway 70 from a gentleman named Jim Doucette, and at one point had, I think, about 9 total charters active in the holding company. But we did begin to trim those back and sell off some, which you could with a state charter, didn't work for a national. But began to grow the bank, still primarily in West Texas. But right toward the end of the 90s, we opened one location in Dallas, North Dallas up near Richardson. Then also bought a bank out in Forney, which is a bedroom community out east of Dallas that has grown enormously over the years out there. I think it was about 16 million in assets when we bought it, and today it's about 300. And that's a big result of, well, us doing a good job as being the community bank there, but also because the growth of the community as the Metroplex has expanded so much. Moving on into the early 2000s, we opened de novo branches, new branches, also in El Paso and in College Station in Houston, and another couple of locations in Dallas, and began to kind of spread out across the state. And we probably grew too fast, quite frankly, up through 2008. And the Great Recession began to hit, and we faced some credit difficulties that, frankly, we were certainly not well prepared for. But the good Lord helped us to survive, and we got through it. But it led to some real challenging things there at that point, challenging decisions, and Corey and I probably learned a little more about banking and banking difficulties than we ever wanted to know. But today we're still here, and I'll expand a little more on that in a few minutes.
Thanks. It's a good time to take a break. I want to remind our listeners that all of our archived West Texas episodes, including this show, are available on demand on our app and also on our website at classical1057.org. We'll be right back. All right, we're back in studio with Curtis Griffith. We've talked a little bit about the growth of Citibank, and Curtis took us up in the last session through the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, mentioned some of the challenges that they worked their way through at that point. Take us from there to today, and how you guys took South Plains Financial public, and what the institution looks like today.
The Great Recession was hard, and of course we saw quite a few bank failures. This time it wasn't as centered on Texas as it had been back in the 80s. A lot of happened over in Georgia and Florida and that area. It seemed to be more the epicenter this time. But banks had overextended, frankly, and the amazing tool out there of people getting home mortgages that couldn't possibly pay them back, but somehow those things were put into the system, had just created a problem that there was no easy solution for. So even though commercial banks had our problems and our failings on some things, the mortgage industry was the underlying cause, really, of the Great Recession. And it just took a while to clean all of that up. It took us a while to clean up what we'd done as well. Corey Newsom had moved up from chief operating officer to chief executive officer of the bank in 2008. and he worked diligently to work our way through those problem loans, as I did, as others did at the bank, senior leadership there at the time, to kind of divide up our main problem areas and focus on those. And we got through it, and also just expanded our shareholder base a little and brought in a little bit of new capital at the time. It left us in a pretty strong position. And again, we were looking and thinking, if there was a failed bank we might like somewhere, we might consider that. But instead, we just kind of stuck to the branches that we had. We did sell off some of those branches we'd acquired back in '98 that were in rural communities that we just didn't see a lot of growth opportunities in. We could see better growth things for the bank long term in the more metro areas in Texas. So we began to focus more on that. We expanded our staff and began to grow the overall asset size of the bank over the next few years. We were still a subchapter S organization at that time. For your listeners that know how that works, you're not paying taxes at the corporate level. You pay taxes as a shareholder, just like you would if you were in a partnership. And it was really good. And actually, our largest shareholder at the time, we'd made that change in 1997. We had an employee stock ownership program, and it owned a larger percentage of the bank than anybody, including my family. And it was really very tax advantaged, and it was a great thing for quite a while. But as we grew and as we began to look then in 2017, 18, on how we'd continue to grow the bank, we started looking at doing actual just straight up acquisitions, finding a bank that was interested in selling and negotiating and buying it. As a sub-S bank, you're limited on the number of shareholders, so that we couldn't do. So we converted to a subchapter C corporation in 2018 and then made the big leap to take the bank public in May of 2019, become listed on NASDAQ. It was very interesting. We got the joy of leasing a jet and flying around the country on what's known as a road show to talk to prospective investors over about 10 days' time and try to line up some early investors that would buy our stock as it went public. We still have a huge amount of our stock that's controlled right here locally around Lubbock, but we do have some large investment firms that have bought some of our stock. Nobody has anywhere near control of it. We're still largely an insider-owned organization in many, many ways. But it's been, I think, a valuable tool for us and a great education. Later that year, we acquired a group of 5 banks down in the Permian Basin in Midland, Odessa. Odessa was actually the headquarters for them, in Monahans, Kermit, and down in Fort Stockton. That have performed very well, and we're continuing to look at more expansion and more opportunities in the Permian Basin. But we also have done really well out in El Paso with our group out there, in Houston, in the Dallas area. We have a couple of locations right there, one in Uptown, one up in Plano. Great team that works there, and like I said, the good Lord smiled on us. We've got a great customer base in many of those locations, and just an outstanding team of people that work hard and really do believe in what we're doing and how we do try to serve the communities in where we do business. It's kind of odd because in those very large metro communities, you can't really be a community bank in the sense that we think of it. Most people consider it, certainly here in Lubbock and Morton and other things. But some of the other locations you can. Forney, for one, we've enjoyed that relationship with the community. As I say, our name's on the football stadium down there, and we're thought of very much as a hometown bank, and that's what we want to be. Everywhere that it makes sense, we're the hometown bank, even though our headquarters are here in Lubbock. And it's been a good ride on that, and like I said, just very fortunate to get to work with some great people while we did it.
We have all too little time to talk about this, but tell us about some of the ways Citibank has supported the community and some of your favorite aspects of the Lubbock community.
Lubbock's a great place. It really is. Mr. Lloyd, who was, as the saying goes, probably tighter than bark on a tree, warned us a little bit. He said, "You boys are coming from a small town. You're not going to, you think you know people that are going to come ask for money. I'm going to tell you there's going to be somebody here every day with a palm out asking for money." And he wasn't too far wrong. But there are some great organizations here in Lubbock that we've loved to support over the years. We've been fairly significant donors to the Lubbock Symphony, and very proud of the way that organization has developed and what it has done over the years. We have helped quite a bit with the honor flight over the years, and that's just amazing what they do. We've been parts of multiple other charities here, and every year, for the last several years, we offer a program that we call Community Rewards that allows any nonprofit in our region here, or now we do it also in the Permian, and we do it in El Paso, that they can go to our website and encourage people to vote for their particular charity, which puts their name out, gets them more publicity, and then we put, in each location, we put about $60,000 in the pot, and the ones with the most vote get the most money in those. We have different categories of it, and it's fun every year to see some you've never heard of that will step up, and they'll get their supporters to get busy and make the votes, and sometimes it's really helped them move forward and move into another level of what they can do as an organization. So I've always said West Texas in particular, and it's all West Texas, Lubbock, Permian, El Paso, it's an area that people think of maybe too much nationally, internationally as the rugged solo cowboy out there. That's not how life is here. It never has been. We all depend on each other. Whether we're in those early days with settlers on the plains, that if you didn't know your neighbors and they weren't willing to come help you when somebody was sick or hurt or had a barn burned down or whatever, you didn't make it. So we all depend on each other out here. And as City Bank, that's what we're all about. We help people try to achieve their dreams and take care of the communities that are good to us.
Curtis, thank you for taking time to share your story with us today. Really proud of Citibank and the role you all play in the broader community and your support for it. Thank you for listening today. If you know anybody whose story we should share here on Archive West Texas, please email your suggestion to info@classical1057.org. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson. Please join us next time for another edition of Archive West Texas.